The late-night hours of October 11th, 2025, began with a silence that felt wrong. Western Alaska, tucked away in its cold isolation, had long known storms. People here were used to harsh winds and freezing nights. But on this night, the air itself carried a heaviness, a strange stillness that made even seasoned villagers uneasy. Somewhere far out over the Bering Sea, the remnants of Typhoon Halong were gathering force, moving quietly, like a predator stalking its prey. Meteorologists had warned of a major storm surge, but no one expected what was about to unfold. Just before dawn, the sea began to rise, first slowly, then with terrifying speed. Record-breaking storm surges slammed into the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, turning quiet fishing villages into a battlefield between land and ocean. Water that had once lapped gently against wooden docks now swallowed entire streets. Winds howled at 100 miles per hour, tearing through walls and roofs with ease. In Kipnuk and Kwigillingok, small communities that depend on air and water routes for everything from food to medicine, the storm's arrival was like a sledgehammer. Houses were ripped from their foundations and swept away like toys in a river. Wooden beams snapped like matchsticks. The power grid collapsed. Roads disappeared under swirling, icy floodwaters.
Outside my parents' house.
The world these people had built over generations was vanishing before their eyes. Families scrambled into the darkness, some wading chest deep through freezing water, clutching children and whatever they could carry. But there was nowhere to run. This wasn't just a flood, it was a siege. The sea was pushing further inland, breaking every previous water level record in the region. By morning, the destruction was total. What had once been whole neighborhoods now looked like a war zone. More than 1,500 people were displaced overnight. For many, the homes they'd lived in for decades were gone, either reduced to splinters or floating miles away. Entire families stood on patches of high ground, watching helplessly as everything they owned was devoured by the tide. But this was only the beginning. The roads, those few fragile ribbons of connection between these remote villages, were washed away. Regional airports were damaged, making ground or air travel nearly impossible. Rescuers had to fight against the wind to even get near the disaster zone. Then came the chilling first report. One person dead, their body found in the wreckage of a collapsed structure. Hours later, 2 people were declared missing, likely swept away in the night as the water rose. Their families waited in bitter cold, clinging to a sliver of hope. The Alaska Air National Guard and the U.S. Coast Guard launched an operation unlike anything the state had ever seen. Helicopters roared through the storm, hovering over flooded villages to pull people to safety. This was the largest air evacuation in Alaska's history, with hundreds of residents airlifted from rooftops, broken docks, and makeshift shelters. Those who were rescued were taken to temporary shelters. gyms, and a National Guard armory, where exhausted families wrapped themselves in blankets and listened to the storm still raging outside. Meanwhile, federal agencies began to mobilize. Search and rescue teams spread out, moving cautiously across a landscape that no longer looked like the Alaska they knew. Houses sat twisted and half submerged. Trucks and fishing boats were overturned. Bridges were gone. Emergency workers faced more than just destruction. They faced isolation, as the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta's remoteness made logistics a nightmare. Then came the second blow. Barely 2 days after Typhoon Halong's remnants struck, another storm system hit the same region. It didn't give people time to breathe. It didn't let rescuers rebuild. It hit the broken villages again, hammering whatever was still standing. If the first storm had stripped the land of safety, this one stripped it of hope. Communities that had already recorded historic storm surges now faced another round of flooding. Survivors who thought they were safe in higher ground shelters watched water creep closer again. Rescue crews were pushed to their limits. Aid was delayed, and the clock was ticking because winter was closing in fast. In Alaska, winter isn't just a season, it's a wall. Once it arrives, getting food, medicine, or construction supplies into these remote communities becomes almost impossible. Every hour mattered. Rescuers searched for the two missing people, navigating a maze of floating debris and twisted metal. Entire homes had been swept off their foundations and carried far downriver. Some families returned to find only empty land where their homes had stood. The storm's fury exposed the vulnerability of these remote Alaskan communities. Many are reachable only by plane or boat. When disaster strikes, help takes time. And in disasters like this, time costs lives. But thousands of miles away, under a warm Malaysian night sky, a different storm was preparing its own ambush. It was October 15th, 2025, just 2 days before Alaska's disaster. In Sijangkang and Telok Gong, two towns in Kuala Langat, Selangor, Malaysia, the evening was still and humid. Children played outside. Families gathered for dinner. There was no storm warning, no alarm, nothing but the thick, quiet air. Then, at around 8 p.m., everything changed. Out at sea, a tornado-like waterspout had formed, unpredictable, violent, and fast. Within minutes, it moved inland like a monster, spinning at frightening speed. The sound hit first, a deep, rumbling roar that grew louder with each second. Before anyone could react, roofs began lifting off houses. Windows shattered. The air was filled with debris. The state constituency coordinator's office collapsed, burying a woman inside. Rescue teams rushed in as the wind howled around them, pulling her out alive, bloodied but breathing. Within minutes, 40 houses were damaged or destroyed. 5 schools were torn apart, their roofs ripped off like paper. A community hall stood gutted, its walls cracked and ceiling gone. What had been a peaceful neighborhood now looked like a disaster zone.
Hitze.
9 students from a nearby Kafa Surau, children who had been attending evening prayers, were injured by flying debris. In total, over a dozen people were hurt. Parents screamed their children's names through the storm. Those who could fled to a temporary evacuation center, clutching what little they could carry. When the winds finally died down, the damage was everywhere. Metal sheets hung twisted from power lines. Cars were overturned. Streets were littered with shattered glass and broken wood. The fear was raw, not just because of what had happened, but because no one saw it coming. The Malaysian Meteorological Department, Met Malaysia, confirmed that the storm was a rare tornado-like phenomenon caused by a waterspout moving inland. Experts explained that climate change was creating unstable atmospheric conditions, making such extreme weather more likely. This was not the first such incident in Malaysia, but it was one of the most destructive. Met Malaysia pledged to improve early warning systems to give people more time to react. But for the families in Sijangkang and Telogong, the damage had already been done. Their homes were gone, their schools were wrecked, their sense of safety was shattered. In Alaska, people were shivering in shelters, waiting for winter to arrive over the wreckage of their homes. In Malaysia, people stood under a humid night sky, staring at broken roofs and cracked walls. 2 storms, 2 continents, 2 disasters, linked not by location, but by timing, devastation, and the terrifying speed of nature. The Alaska storm left 1 confirmed dead, 2 missing, over 1,500 displaced, and hundreds airlifted in the state's largest rescue mission. Homes were swept away, airports and roads were crushed. A second storm compounded the chaos. Winter threatened everything that remained. The Malaysia storm injured more than a dozen people, damaged 40 homes, 5 schools, a community hall, and caused dozens to be displaced. A woman was trapped in rubble but rescued. Students were hurt. Lives were upended. Both disasters revealed the same brutal truth. When nature strikes, safety is not guaranteed, no matter where you live. Whether in a frozen Alaskan delta or a warm Malaysian village, the line between safe and unsafe can vanish in a single night. And sometimes the warning comes too late, or not at all. So when the next storm comes roaring through, will we be ready, or will we once again be caught off guard?